Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Tyrone back with Tech Life. And in this video, I wanted to talk about the auction results for T-Mobile in auction 110. I got the map up. Didn't need one for Verizon when I made that video because they didn't buy anything. They walked. They spent not a single penny on auction 110. So here we have T-Mobile's auction results where they purchased the spectrum. As you can see here on the map, the darker blue are some of the regions where they got 40 megahertz. And then the lighter blue is where they purchased around the 15, 20 megahertz. From what I've seen per estimates, they purchased around 15 megahertz in the top 100 PEAs. So this purchasing is a similar pattern to where they spent money on in auction 107 when they originally first bought that chunk, that 40 megahertz chunk of spectrum in the top. I think it was covering 225 million pops. So this is a very similar pattern where they purchased in this auction. So to kind of put that in perspective, there's still many people telling me this spending here in this auction, they could have made better use with that money. Coverage expansion, densification, security. I mean, I'm being told this left and right. But T-Mobile felt like they needed more spectrum. So they went out, they bought it. I mean, the home internet growth, the demand for that product is insane. And it's still easier and faster to throw spectrum at a macro to keep it running above congestion. Now, I know densification plays a factor in that, but I know densification can take sometimes up to 2 years, even still with small cells. Small cells under some municipalities take as long as a macro to gain zoning approval, permits, and all that. Literally. So it is oftentimes faster and better to just go and upgrade the site with more spectrum. Now, my take on this is the only way in my opinion, for this to make sense for T-Mobile, to make this a part of their deployment engine, and they're going to have to update us at some point as to how they fund this in terms of money. They have to deploy the DoD spectrum and the C-band spectrum in the form of a dual band radio. If they have to touch sites again, which they will, it has to be with equipment that can make use of both of the spectrum blocks that they purchased. If they go and deploy the 107 spectrum and put equipment up for that, and then they go and put equipment up for the DoD spectrum, that will be the most inefficient way T-Mobile ever deploys anything on a macro. I'm 100% confident in that. You can't tell me otherwise, because that's funding for radios and equipment for one spectrum, and then additional funding for panels and radios. And then, of course, you got to pay the tower climbers to climb sites again. So the best way, the most efficient way for T-Mobile to deploy this set of spectrum is to do it with a dual band radio and to touch the site one more time and be able to deploy both spectrum assets in this case. So I think this is a future play for T-Mobile, a longer term play. They don't necessarily 100% need the spectrum at this time, neither the C-band spectrum. They have large chunks of the N41 spectrum they're putting to use now. And that should last them several years, including the Sprint keep sites. It should last at least a year or two. Carriers usually look 2 to 3 years forward into the future in terms of spectrum purchases, and that area may get congestion. That's usually the time frame that they look forward in or look into the future. And eventually, if they can hold off another year on deploying this, there should be, for both Nokia and Ericsson, there should be equipment in form of a dual band radio that allows them to deploy the C-band from auction 107 and the DoD from 110 at the same time. That is the only way this makes sense to me. It would be so inefficient if they went and deployed both separately. They got N41 out there. Auction 108 is coming up, where they can clear up some of that leasing and make the spectrum more contiguous. And then in other parts of the country where they still don't own the entire 194 megahertz, they can make additional purchases to get up to that total if they so choose to. So it's going to be very interesting to see how T-Mobile goes about this. I do agree that they could have made use or spent that $3 billion more efficiently on densification and security and whatever else they have going on the back end. Now, one thing I do want to point out too is we're going to have to see an adjustment on Capex. They're going to have to spend more now. I think they need to go up to 15 billion this year, next year as well, if they want to include this in that deployment engine that they so speak of. We're seeing now, to throw this in, which is great, kind of threw me off. We got the auction 110 results on Friday, and then also started seeing the very first N41 small cell in form of a C-RAN. The C-RAN was structured. This happened in Miami, Florida, and the N41 panels were attached to the same way you're seeing the millimeter wave street macros coming off of the small cell, the 3 sectors. That's the same way T-Mobile attached the N41 panels. So we're seeing that deployment too. So T-Mobile is not shying away from the densification. We just have to see that scale a bit more. They got a ton of macros to worry about right now still. They got Sprint keep sites that they're filling in. And it's like Neville said, no two networks are alike. They're literally in some parts building Sprint keep sites a half a mile away from a T-Mobile site. That's huge densification. So that will help T-Mobile out in many regards, more reliability, better calling, faster speeds, all that good stuff. So they gotta further that investment. They have to increase Capex across the board to be able to deploy this even faster. And I truly believe they have to wait. They have to wait and hold back until there's a dual band radio where they can deploy both of those spectrum assets at the same time. Going back to the site several times, deploying different equipment, in this case, does not make sense at all. It just doesn't. It makes no sense whatsoever for T-Mobile to do this. So let me know what you think about this in the comment section down below. It will be a very interesting setup. The way that I see this setup working is they have the massive MIMO panel for N41. They have the CommScope or the RFS antenna for the N71, Band 2, Band 66. And then in the future, they should have another massive MIMO for the N77 N77 C-band 107 auction, and then the DoD N77 20 megahertz or 40, whichever they purchased in your market, as you see on this map. That should be the future T-Mobile setup on the macros. 100%. That's what we should be seeing in the future, and that should be the most efficient deployment for them. And of course, it should lower the cost of the leasing for the sites somewhat. So again, let me know how you feel about this in the comment section down below. Let me know what you think about T-Mobile purchasing this spectrum. They did end up per megahertz per pop spending more than Dish and AT&T. So this isn't necessarily the most efficient purchase they've ever made, but it seems like the team got together, Neville and his engineering team, and they felt like they needed it for, of course, leadership, bragging rights purposes, on paper, but also for this home internet, because that demand is going to grow through the roof over the next several years. So make sure you guys like, share, subscribe to the channel. Follow the social media outlets for more updates and interactions. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.